Welcome back to this week's project. Today we're going to paint some boats out at Lake Dawson Lake at Moraine View State Park. And this is going to be a little quicker and hopefully a little more fun. So I'm starting off with one of our grays, and I've just mixed up some red and blue to give a nice overall cool gray. And I'm just going to start by blocking in some general forms. And this is a middle tone, it's fairly light, and all I'm really wanting to do is to give myself some basic color structure. And I'll be posting this image so you have access to it as well. Just really looking at establishing what our value scale, what our structure will be, without being too anxious about anything yet. It's always time to be anxious. So I begin by just drawing in my edges of my forms and letting those exist, filling in the other spaces, not worrying too much about it. And because this is a cool, warm, or a warm cool, it's in the middle range, I can play quite a bit with my mark making without worry that I'm overcommitting. Again, the key for this is that I'm not using just a single color, that I'm having a couple different colors that are helping to build these shapes. So I can even move back and forth between warmer and cooler just within the shape of these elements. And again, I'm moving pretty quickly because we're going to be defining details at the end. I'm just blocking in basic forms with the idea that I'll be able to make sense of this with the punctuations of value. I'm leaving a lot of white on purpose because I want these areas to sing. And you can use a combination of hard edges and soft edges to help define your form. I've left some things very kind of wet on dry, other areas wet on wet, all within the same mark making. Not a lot of value shifts, but here I'm doing a little diaphanous, darker area, allowing those things to blend together because I really want this all to look out of focus. You can go around those canoes that are in back there a little bit, just a bit. Okay, very good. that's an initial start. It seems a little bit like a mess right now. There's a lot of things that are undefined. There's a few bits of color that aren't quite where I want them, but we're not going to worry. I think it's a fine start. So what I do next is normally I'll take this outside and let it dry, but my weather isn't cooperating today. We're having a little bit of rain, so I'm going to take it to a hair dryer. I'm going to wave the hair dryer slowly over the surface so that the paint will dry, but I don't want to be moving the paint around. I want to make sure that I'm not blowing streams of paint out of their respective regions, or that I'm getting unexpected puddling I don't want. And again, the way to tell when your watercolor is dry, so you can paint on it again, you want to lay the back of your hand on the sheet of paper. And if it feels cool to the touch, that means there's still water in there. So you want to dry it to be bone dry so we can continue with this painting. Now that I have those kind of medium cool grays added, I want to play with a little bit of yellow. Not a lot, just a little to modify some of those areas of highlight. So I'm not doing anything darker yet, and I just want to give a little bit of dirty yellow to provide some action to these other areas. Notice I'm really going light. This is not anything approaching even a level 3. This is just delicate mark making to modify some of these tonalities. Doesn't take a lot, just a little bit. And I'm going to go just a little bit back here. We have this section of the pier where there's this terrific reflection, and I want to take full advantage of that. And then some of this area of beach, rocky shore, and just give some indication of those areas as well, and indications of trees. We don't need to be anxious about describing everything. We'll be more successful if we are inferring space. And now this area of the pier, that's eventually going to be more of a green. We want it to pull forward. Now, because it's on that corner, it's always going to pop off the edge. And so eventually our problem will be to lay it down. But in the meantime, let's make that color a little richer so it gives us something to modify later on. And just a couple more areas. This will not be yellow later on, but I want to make it a warm gray. Maybe warm up that just a little bit. And this boat just a little bit. And again, I'm pretty much dry brushing that color across it. And every other boat, I'm just going to give a little bit of that tonality so that we can differentiate them as we bring it up. And that's pretty good. And I'm going to go with some of my red, just a tiny little bit of my red, very lightly, because I'm going to have the reflection of those canoes down here. And I want those to be not as light as they are. Anytime you go into water, you're going to change the intensity of those colors. So that's pretty quick. I'm going to use some of that same color just to give indications of those benches, just a little bit. And while I'm at it, just a little bit more. There we go. Still leaving those areas white. It's pretty quick. Now I'll take it to the hairdryer once more, and then we'll come back and we'll do probably 2 more steps, and you may have something. Now we're at the point that we're going to start adding some detail to give some form to this. And because the boats at the front are our primary focus, I'm going to start there and allow that to help define what some of my value ranges and what some of my other decisions will be. So I'm going to go back to mixing up a darker version of that warm gray. And this time I'm going to add a little bit more yellow to it, just to make it more neutral. I don't want these to be elements that you notice the color more than the value. I want it to have some color, but I don't want it to be about the color. So that seems to be a happy medium value. So just plugging things in. I'm going to go back and clean this up and provide a little bit more structure as I go. But for now, I like giving myself those indications of action. So that's a little wet on dry, and I'm going to allow that color to bleed over by adding just a little bit of water. And so that gives me those nice value gradations without a lot of work. And here I want to define that water and the boat all at once. So here I'm showing just that reflection. I'll do the same thing here. And here. Now we have that area of the dock. And so what I'm going to do is very lightly define that shadow. And again, I'm thinking more about value than anything else as I'm kind of blocking in these forms. I haven't done anything with that sky back there, so I'm just going to come in with a very delicate indication of sky. Just that middle tone. Okay, that's pretty good. We'll dry this and then we'll come back in for some pops of color and a little bit of detail. I'm going to bring in a little bit more of my red just to make this a full palette. Again, I'm only using 3 colors on this. So I'm allowing things to be a little abstract. So just bringing in a little bit of red, pretty light actually, just to help define some of these forms. And then a big brush because I want to start defining this dock ever so slightly. So I can view that as being kind of a brown. Not wanting to overwork anything. A little bit more color there, some of that reflected color. That's pretty good. And then I want to come in finally with my darkest areas. So I'm going to pull some of my blue back in. And paint my shadows one more time. I can define this back area, which is my area of one of my biggest value shifts. I'm going to come up for this area of the reflected canoes, and I don't want to get that section which has already been hit. So I'm just going to dance around that so we can leave those areas on their own. And then I like this little bit of a line here as detail. And I'm going to come in and just darken that ever so. Give a sense of movement and form. Some a little more detail here and there. And then finally back to these canoes, which again, I'm only inferring. I like that pretty well. I want to go even darker, so I'm going to darken this section just a bit. And because it's already wet, I'm going to get some more indigo out. Because it's already wet, I can just add a little bit more paint to it and let it bleed out and make it seem organic, which is exactly what I want. And I'll do the same thing up front here. And then just a little bit more detail. And then I'm going to call this done. Obviously, you can come back in and play with any areas you want to provide a little more definition, or color shifts, or action. But I think we have a pretty workable landscape. Well, I've let the painting dry overnight and I've come back and take a look at it, and I'm not convinced that the color works. While the value scale seems to make some sense, it feels fairly anemic to me, like there's not quite enough warm color to balance all that other. So I'm adding a little bit of sienna, which I'll mix with my red to give myself some variation of warm colors. I'm going to come back in and do some modification. First thing I want to do is take this kind of forward area of the dock and make that have a rich tone. I'll leave a little sliver of the underpainting yellow just to give a sense of light there. The thing to think about with watercolor is that it is primarily an additive medium. I mean, you can go in and scrub and lift some paint off, but by and large, everything you're going to do to modify the painting is adding more. And it's the more that becomes the issue, because it's very easy to add too much or to lose control and get frustrated. So I tend to sneak up pretty slowly on a painting. In this case, you know, I have my source image, which I'm using slightly at this point. The thing to think about with any painting is that the place that you're painting it from, if you have a reference, or the photograph, will never be sitting side by side as a comparison when people evaluate the relative success of your work. So you get to be the master of what makes a painting finished and complete. So take advantage of that and make the best decisions for the painting. So I'm just going to play up some of my value scale here, taking some of these areas a little bit darker. And again, the thing to think about is all this is additive. I'm adding and I'm adding and I'm adding. And already it's a much more interesting painting. I'm going to go even darker in this section, and I'm fortunate in that I left that little bit of yellow line there by and large. So because of that, I can go darker and it won't bleed over because this area is still very, very wet. So I'm mixing, in this case, a little bit of a cobalt blue and a little bit of indigo blue to give me a nice dark, dark blue. So I'm going to come in and just do these shadows again. And I'm going to thin that down, that same color down, to really a very light mix of mostly just water, because I want to bleed that color over. Now I'm leaving a little area here because I want to indicate what would be that rope mooring the boat to the water. And as I come out with my wet on dry over this dry area, I'm moving away from the pure indigo blue more into a cobalt blue because it's a warmer blue. It has more color intensity and it has a little bit more of a red tone. And so that allows that color to pull forward. And already that's much, much better. Change up the brushes a little bit and just these few punctuations, just this little bit of detail will make a huge difference in this painting feeling resolved. Okay, I think we're pretty good. I'm going to let this dry, and I'll know in a little while whether I think the painting works. All right, looking at the painting now, there's a lot I really like. I think adding the orange and the yellow made a big, big difference. Now all the indigo is really reading as value and not as color. And this area behind the boats doesn't have the liveliness that I think it really needs and that the source image had. So what I'm going to do is I'm using a little bit of that cobalt blue. I'm just going to do one last wash and then I think I'm done. I think I'm done with the whole painting. All right, I think that's it. I'll let it dry, and I'll see what we have.